I want to talk to you about something that your English teacher got slightly wrong. Not wrong, but well-intentioned wrong. The sort of you need to know the rule before you can break it kind of wrong. They told you to never use passive voice. But today, I'm going to talk about how knowing how to use passive voice can make you an unstoppable writer. Every writing book says it, every style guide discourages it. Microsoft Word and Clippy in their infinite wisdom will give them a little underline in blue and a disappointed squiggle whenever you try to use it. And for most situations, in most sentences, most of the time, they're probably right. Passive voice is weaker, it's vague, it's potentially confusing, it slows your writing down. But there are moments, specific deliberate moments, when passive voice is exactly the right tool to use. So today I'm going to talk about what passive voice is, why it often causes problems, and I'm going to give you 4 situations in which it's not just acceptable, but a powerful thing to do. So let's make sure we're starting from the same place. I promise not to make this a grammar lesson and make you diagram out a sentence. But here's what you need to know. Active voice is the natural order of an English sentence. It goes subject, verb, object. Someone does an action to a thing. In an active sentence, the subject does an action. Gary threw the ball. Gary is doing the thing. He is the subject of the sentence. He is the one with agency. It's clear, direct, simple. You can imagine what's happening. Passive voice flips that around. The object of the action comes first and the verb goes soft. Was thrown instead of threw, and the person responsible for the action gets relegated to the back behind the word by. Or sometimes they can disappear entirely. You could say actively, Jake broke the window. Or a perfectly acceptable passive version is the window was broken. The window was broken? By whom? We don't know, because the agent, the one who's responsible for it, has been erased. Okay, so now that we know what we're dealing with, why does it usually cause problems? I'm just going to speed through this because I want to get to the interesting stuff soon. The main problem with passive voice is that it removes the human character from the center of it all. And in fiction and storytelling in general, the human being is kind of the whole point. A door was slammed. I'm looking at a door. A door isn't necessarily interesting in and of itself. She slammed the door. Now I'm thinking about her anger. What just happened? The story is the person, not the furniture. The same with this. She signed the document, or passively, the document was signed. The document was signed by whom? Who's in charge here? Who had the power to do the signing? The passive construction collapses all the drama out of this moment. On top of that, passive voice often focuses on the end state of things, when very often the action, the active voice, is the thing that is actually most interesting. If we were to write, the car had been destroyed by Catherine, we're not invited into the action of the car being wrecked by Catherine the errant driver. As a reader, we're being shown a car that has been pre-destroyed. It has gone from something active to something static. And as readers, we generally find it more interesting to see action than it is to see the general state of things in static tableau. Right. Those are the problems. Now, let's talk about the good stuff. Everything I said about passive voice so far is true. It does depersonalize, it does remove agency, it does sap the energy out of prose. But here's the truth, sometimes you do want to depersonalize, you do want to slow things down, you do want to create distance. Sometimes obscuring who did a thing is the entire point. Now here are 4 ways that skillful writers can use passive voice on purpose and what it actually achieves. Number 1, it creates psychic distance and alienation. Now if these terms feel unfamiliar, don't worry about it. Hopefully this example will clear things up for you. There's a short story called Popular Mechanics by Raymond Carver, one of the great short story writers of the 20th century. It's brutal, disturbing, it's only about a page long and you can find it online quite easily. A husband is leaving his wife. He's cramming all his belongings into a suitcase while his wife screams at him. Their baby is in the room and he coldly announces that he's taking the child with him. What follows is a physical tug of war with the child. And Carver ends his story like this. She felt her fingers being forced open. She felt the baby going from her. No, she screamed, just as her hands came loose. She would have it, this baby. She grabbed for the baby's other arm. She caught the baby around the wrist and leaned back, but he would not let go. He felt the baby slipping out of his hands and he pulled back very hard. In this manner, the issue was decided. Now let's sit with that for a second. Issue is an old legal and aristocratic word for one's own child. The Duke died without a male issue, and the word decide actually comes from the Latin decidere, meaning to cut off, to separate. So Carver's final sentence, which appears to be pulling away from the scene in a clinical, detached way, in fact, describes exactly what happens next. In a Wisdom of Solomon-like moment, the baby was cut off, torn apart. The issue was, in the most literal sense, decided. The passive construction of that final sentence puts this layer of glass between the reader and the action. To describe the carnage directly would overshadow the tragedy with gory horror. By stepping back, by going cold, Carver makes the reader do some of the work, making them lean forward and try to figure out exactly what happened. The distance he creates is the horror and the tragedy. So, when can you use passive voice to create this psychic distance? When you want the reader to feel a little bit removed from the action, as though watching through a thick pane of glass. You might use it when the horror or violence might actually be worse when it's not named directly, leaving it up to the reader's imagination. You can use it when emotional numbness is the point, or when the character is describing something that they can't fully face. Which takes me to point number 2. Trauma and dissociation. So, next up on our list of reasons why you might want to use passive voice is something that comes just as much from psychology as it does from writing craft. When people recount traumatic events, talking about things that happened to them, they will often shift into passive voice without realizing it. I was hit, we were ambushed, something happened to me. That passive construction creates distance again between the speaker and the event they're describing. It avoids claiming the horror as your own experience, something that happened to you, to your body, in your own life. In therapy, this is sometimes seen as a step in processing trauma. You use the passive before you're ready to use the active, before you're ready to say, he hurt me. In this case, the difference between these two examples isn't just grammatical, it's psychological. And for fiction writers, this is an extraordinary tool. If your character has experienced trauma and they're narrating it with passive voice, not because you're writing it badly, but because you're writing it accurately, it tells the reader something about that character's mental state, something profound about where they are right now and what they can't yet say. So, in this context, passive voice can be used when a character is recounting something they haven't yet fully processed. They might use it if they're looking to protect themselves by not naming their perpetrator. The vagueness might be a sign of their psychological damage. And you can use it when you want the reader to sense this gap between something that happened and what your character is ready to say. Okay, let's lighten things up a bit. Passive voice is also something that can become part of a character's everyday language, even if they're not going through some sort of trauma. It could be a central part of that character's voice for many other reasons. In Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Collins is one of literature's great comic creations. He's a pompous cousin to the Bennets who is to inherit their home on account of him being a man and them being women. He's a snivelling toad to anyone he sees as above his station, and condescending to anyone he sees as below him, and he's completely oblivious to how he's perceived. There is a section where it is decided that he will propose to Lizzie Bennet, and let's see how Austen has him speak during this proposal. But before I am run away with my feelings on this subject, perhaps it would be advisable for me to state my reasons for marrying, and moreover for coming to Hertfordshire with the design of selecting a wife, as I certainly did. He then goes on a tangent that reveals that he has come to select a wife at the behest of his revered patron Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Thus much for my general intention in favour of matrimony. It remains to be told why my views were directed towards Longbourn instead of my own neighbourhood, where I assure you there are many amiable young women. What makes Mr. Collins' voice interesting is that he does two contradictory things at the same time. Before I am run away with my feelings, my views were directed towards Longbourn. Collins doesn't choose, he doesn't decide. He is guided, directed, acted upon. This passive construction removes his agency entirely. He is simply at the mercy of the universe and his benevolent patron who sits high above him. And of course, below him sit the Bennets. For them, this arrangement is of course obvious. Of course they would be grateful for his patronage of them. Passive voice is something that appears quite a lot in Austen's work, and in that of her contemporaries writing about the British upper classes. Perhaps it was a key part of polite society, to remove oneself from the messy business of taking ownership of decisions and feelings. Sorry old boy, I'm afraid it's been settled. You've been given the axe. It's a funny old thing about power. If you have enough of it, you have the luxury of denying that you have any of it at all. Okay, so in this context, what sort of character would use passive voice? Someone who perhaps thinks that the world revolves around them. Someone who's being modest or falsely modest. Someone who's evading responsibility, or someone for whom it's just merely part of their vernacular. But even so, if it is simply the way that they speak, you can ask yourself why that might be. What is it in the way that they were raised that has led them to speak like this? Okay, for this last point I'm going to take an example that's not from fiction, but from, let's say, the real world. And I think it's the most important one for fiction writers to understand, because it shows you what passive voice is capable of, at its most powerful and its most dangerous. So let's talk about journalism. Journalism is supposed to tell you what happened, Who did it and to whom? A group of robbers stole the Mona Lisa from the Louvre. But passive voice allows you to technically describe an event while systematically changing the accountability. Let's compare these two headlines. City police beat protesters in planned demonstration. Or, to take the passive version, protesters were beaten by police in planned demonstration. Now both sentences describe the same event, but the emphasis is different. The active version centers the police, and it's about their assault on the demonstrators, and makes the readers wonder why they did it. The passive version puts the protesters at the center, and the story becomes more about their experience of being beaten perhaps. Neither is false, but the emphasis is slightly different. But let's take it one step further with a headline like, "Protesters beaten in demonstration crackdown." This last one now removes the subject of the sentence altogether, the police. With each layer of passive voice, the character with agency, the one who did the action, is being pushed further and further back. Each of the different headlines you read will shape how a reader perceives what happens. Passive voice is a tool of emphasis, and it can completely affect the framing of a story. Mistakes were made, the building was damaged, the suspect was shot. Who made the mistakes? Who damaged the building? Who actually shot the suspect? Passive voice allows you not to say it while still appearing to tell the story. Now, why does any of this matter if you're writing fiction and not filing copy for a newspaper? Because every narrator makes these choices. Every time you write a scene, you make a decision about whose name goes first, who acts and who is being acted upon, who has agency and who has things being done to them, whose story are you actually telling within a scene. If your villain is always the subject of active verbs and your victim is always the object of passive constructions, then you're writing a story about powerlessness, whether you mean to or not. And if you want to write a character who systematically refuses to acknowledge what they've done, a coward, an abuser, a self-deceiver, then passive voice is a very precise tool to use. They don't hit people, things happen, situations developed, it couldn't be helped. A journalist can use passive voice to center someone else or to quietly erase them altogether. Your characters can do the same in their dialogue, in their inner monologue, and how they choose to retell their stories to themselves and others. Passive voice, when used deliberately, isn't weak writing. It's a way of showing your readers who a person is by what they won't say and who they won't reveal. So again, here's the thing about rules in writing. Rules exist because most people, most of the time, make a particular mistake again and again. Passive voice is weak, so the rule says avoid it. Use active voice, put the character at the center of a sentence, make them do things. And that rule is good. It will make your writing clearer and more energetic. But the rule is not the whole story. Not all passive voice is bad writing, not all active voice is good writing. The difference lies in intention. If you're working on a manuscript right now and would like an editor to help you see what's working and what's not, finessing your prose, helping you with things like active and passive voice, you can find over 1,200 of them here on Readsy. You can sign up for your free account today using the link in the description. If you enjoyed this, let me know in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe for more great stuff about writing and publishing books. I've been Martin from Readsy, and I'll see you soon.